The Chernobyl disaster is one of the worst nuclear accidents in history. The 2019 miniseries Chernobyl, created by HBO, tells the dramatic and tragic story of what happened on April 26, 1986, at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Soviet Ukraine. The series captures the disaster's causes, the government's response, and the devastating impact it had on people and the environment. It provides a deep insight into the courage of those who tried to contain the disaster and the horrifying consequences of misinformation, negligence, and secrecy. Chernobyl is not just a story about a nuclear explosion, it is a story about human error, sacrifice, and the pursuit of truth. The series explains how small mistakes and a lack of safety measures led to one of the most catastrophic events in human history. It also highlights the bravery of scientists, workers, and firefighters who risked their lives to prevent an even worse catastrophe. The explosion and immediate response on April 26, 1986, Reactor 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded during a late-night safety test. The explosion released massive amounts of radiation into the air. At first, the plant workers and Soviet officials refused to believe that a reactor could explode. Many believed it was a minor fire or a system failure. Firefighters were sent to the plant without proper protective gear, unaware that they were being exposed to lethal radiation levels. As the fire burned, radioactive particles spread into the air, reaching nearby towns. The residents of Pripyat, a city built for the plant's workers, continued their daily lives without realizing the danger they were in. Soviet authorities hesitated to evacuate the city, fearing that admitting the severity of the situation would cause panic. The delay exposed thousands of people to dangerous radiation levels, leading to severe health consequences in the years that followed. The Soviet government's reaction when reports of the explosion reached Moscow, Soviet leaders struggled to handle the crisis. Instead of immediately addressing the disaster, they tried to downplay its severity. Many officials refused to accept that Reactor 4 had been destroyed. They sent in workers to inspect the damage, many of whom received fatal doses of radiation. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union attempted to keep the disaster a secret from the world. However, when high radiation levels were detected in Sweden, international concerns forced the government to acknowledge the explosion. This delay in action worsened the situation, as many people continued to be exposed to radiation without any safety measures in place. The evacuation of Pripyat by April 27, authorities finally ordered the evacuation of Pripyat. Over 50,000 residents were told to leave their homes, believing they would return in a few days. They were not informed about the real danger. Families left everything behind, and their city became an abandoned ghost town overnight. Even after the evacuation, radiation continued to spread across Europe. The Soviet Union had to take drastic measures to contain the contamination, including sealing off the plant and clearing radioactive debris. Soldiers, engineers, and volunteers, known as liquidators, were sent in to clean up the mess. Many of them suffered long-term health effects due to radiation exposure. The role of scientists and investigators. Soviet scientist Valery Legasov played a crucial role in understanding the disaster. He, along with nuclear physicist Ulana Khomyak, a fictional character representing several real scientists, tried to uncover the truth about what went wrong. They faced resistance from Soviet authorities, who wanted to protect the government's reputation rather than admit failure. Legasov and Khomyak discovered that the explosion was caused by a flawed reactor design and human error. The safety test conducted that night went wrong because of poor decisions made by plant operators and the design's hidden weaknesses. The Soviet government had ignored warnings about these flaws for years, and the disaster was a result of negligence and secrecy. The liquidators and their sacrifice. In the weeks following the explosion, thousands of workers were sent to Chernobyl to help contain the disaster. These included firefighters, miners, and soldiers, known as liquidators. Their mission was to remove radioactive debris, build barriers, and prevent further radiation leaks. Many of them were not given adequate protection, and their exposure led to severe health problems. One of the most dangerous tasks was removing radioactive graphite from the reactor's roof. The Soviet government initially tried using robots, but the intense radiation damaged their electronics. As a result, workers, known as biorobots, were sent to manually remove the debris. Each worker could only stay on the roof for seconds before being pulled back to avoid lethal exposure. Their sacrifice helped prevent a greater disaster but cost many of them their lives. The trial and accountability. The Soviet government held a trial to assign blame for the disaster. Plant officials, including Director Viktor Brukhanov and Chief Engineer Anatoly Dyatlov, were accused of negligence and mismanagement. The trial was an attempt to show that the disaster was caused by individual mistakes rather than systemic failures. Valery Legasov testified at the trial, explaining how the reactor's flawed design contributed to the explosion. His testimony exposed the Soviet government's cover-up and lack of safety protocols. However, despite his efforts to reveal the truth, the authorities continued to downplay their role in the disaster. Legasov later took his own life, frustrated by the government's unwillingness to change. His recorded tapes, which detailed the real causes of Chernobyl, were eventually leaked and forced Soviet leaders to acknowledge their mistakes. Health and environmental impact. The radiation from Chernobyl caused severe and often fatal health problems for thousands of people. Many first responders and plant workers, unaware of the true extent of the danger, died within weeks due to acute radiation sickness, their bodies overwhelmed by the intense exposure. Others developed various forms of cancer, particularly thyroid cancer, and suffered from a range of long-term illnesses years later, a grim testament to the insidious nature of radioactive contamination. The children born in affected areas also suffered disproportionately, with increased rates of birth defects, genetic abnormalities, and other health complications, impacting their lives from the very beginning. The environment around Chernobyl remains contaminated even today, decades after the disaster. The area known as the exclusion zone, a stark and desolate landscape, is still largely uninhabitable due to persistently high radiation levels. While wildlife has surprisingly returned to this restricted area, creating a unique, albeit radioactive, ecosystem, scientists continue to study the long-term and often subtle effects of radiation on the flora and fauna, seeking to understand the complex interplay between nature's resilience and the enduring legacy of human error. The long-term impact on the soil, water, and air within the exclusion zone also remains a subject of ongoing research. The legacy of Chernobyl. The Chernobyl disaster left a lasting impact on nuclear safety, environmental concerns, and historical awareness. It serves as a stark warning about the dangers of government secrecy and negligence, demonstrating how the suppression of information can exacerbate a crisis and erode public trust. Today, the abandoned city of Pripyat stands as a ghostly reminder of what happened, a chilling testament to the devastating power of unchecked technological risk. Tourists and researchers visit the exclusion zone, learning about the disaster's impact firsthand, not only on the physical environment but also on the lives and communities irrevocably altered by the event. These visits serve as a powerful educational tool, ensuring that the lessons of Chernobyl are not forgotten. The tragedy also fundamentally changed global perceptions of nuclear power, leading to a significant shift in safety protocols and increased awareness of the inherent risks involved. While some countries continue to rely on nuclear energy, Chernobyl's legacy influences policies to ensure safety measures are always prioritized, prompting a continual re-evaluation of existing safeguards and the development of new technologies aimed at minimizing the potential for future accidents. The disaster highlighted the need for international cooperation and transparency in the nuclear industry, emphasizing the importance of shared knowledge and best practices to prevent similar tragedies from occurring. The legacy of Chernobyl. The Chernobyl disaster left a lasting impact on nuclear safety, environmental concerns, and historical awareness. It serves as a stark warning about the dangers of government secrecy and negligence, demonstrating how a lack of transparency can amplify the consequences of a technological disaster. Today, the abandoned city of Pripyat stands as a ghostly reminder of what happened, its empty streets and decaying buildings a chilling testament to the destructive power of nuclear fallout and the hasty evacuation that followed. Tourists and researchers visit the exclusion zone, learning about the disaster's impact firsthand, not only on the physical environment but also on the social fabric of the region, witnessing the long-term effects of radiation exposure and the displacement of entire communities. The tragedy also fundamentally changed global perceptions of nuclear power, leading to stricter regulations and increased awareness of the inherent risks involved. While some countries continue to rely on nuclear energy, Chernobyl's legacy influences policies to ensure safety measures are always prioritized, prompting a continual re-evaluation of existing safeguards and the development of new technologies aimed at minimizing the potential for future accidents. The disaster underscored the need for robust emergency response protocols and international cooperation in the face of nuclear crises. Chernobyl is more than just a historical drama, it is a powerful and enduring reminder of what happens when truth is ignored and safety is compromised for political expediency. The disaster could have been prevented, or at least mitigated, if warnings about the reactor's flaws had been taken seriously and proper precautions had been in place. The series highlights not only the systemic failures that contributed to the catastrophe but also the extraordinary courage of those who fought tirelessly to contain the unimaginable damage, often at great personal cost. These individuals, from the firefighters who first responded to the explosion to the miners who worked in dangerous conditions to secure the reactor core, demonstrated remarkable bravery in the face of overwhelming danger. The tragedy also underscores the devastating and long-lasting consequences faced by thousands of innocent people, whose lives were irrevocably altered by radiation exposure, displacement, and the loss of loved ones. Chernobyl serves as a stark lesson for future generations, emphasizing the critical importance of transparency, accountability, and a relentless commitment to safety in all technological endeavors, especially those with the potential for widespread devastation.